The chandeliers in the Carter mansion glowed like golden suns, casting their light over the marble floor and crystal glasses. Laughter echoed across the grand hall, but to Ethan Carter it all sounded hollow, like lines from a play that everyone had rehearsed too many times. He sat at the long dining table, staring at the mountain of gifts piled high beside him, designer watches, rare wines, even a brand new car waiting outside in the driveway. It was his 21st birthday, the day his family believed he had finally stepped into their world of power and wealth. Servants moved quietly around the room, refilling champagne flutes and clearing plates from the endless dinner courses. Aunts and uncles raised their glasses with fake smiles, their compliments dripping with envy. His cousin Alex leaned back in his chair, smirking as if he already knew how this night would end. Ethan felt the weight of their eyes on him, expecting him to bask in the glory of being a Carter. But inside, he felt nothing but unease. At the head of the table sat Richard Carter, the family patriarch. At 78, his sharp eyes still carried the same fire that had built an empire worth billions. When he raised his glass, the entire room went silent. Everyone knew his words mattered more than anyone else's. Richard leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Ethan. His voice cut through the silence, low but piercing. "Do you like the money?" The room froze. Forks stopped midway, glasses hovered in the air. Ethan felt his chest tighten as the words settled on him. It wasn't a question about the gifts or the cars. It was a challenge, a test. His grandfather's eyes bored into him, as if searching for the truth he was too afraid to say aloud. Ethan's lips parted, but no sound came out. He could feel his father, Daniel Carter, glaring at him from the other end of the table. Daniel's expression was cold, expectant, almost threatening. To Daniel, money was love, money was power, money was the Carter name. Any hesitation from Ethan would be seen as betrayal. Around the table, family members exchanged quick glances. Some smirked, some whispered, waiting for Ethan's response. He felt trapped, like a prize animal being tested for its worth. His heart raced. If he said yes, he would be just another Carter, swallowing the poison of greed like the rest of them. If he said no, he risked angering the man who held his entire future in his hand. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Richard's face remained unreadable, but his silence was heavy, pressing down on Ethan. The only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, Ethan lowered his eyes to his plate, unable to answer. The shame, the weight, the unspoken conflict wrapped around him like chains. He felt his father's glare burning hotter, a silent warning of what was to come. In that moment, Ethan understood what this birthday truly meant. It wasn't a celebration of his life. It was the beginning of a war for his soul. When Ethan was a boy, he thought his family had everything. The big house with endless rooms, the sleek cars lined up in the driveway, the vacations on private islands. But the older he got, the more he realized that all the wealth in the world couldn't fill the silence in his home. His mother, Laura, was the only warmth he knew. She would sit with him at night, reading stories or sneaking him into the garden to watch the stars. She used to say, "Ethan, don't let this house teach you that money is love. Real love feels lighter, freer." But when Ethan turned 10, she was gone. One morning, she kissed him on the forehead, tears in her eyes, and left. No explanation, no long goodbye. Just gone. Later, he overheard whispers that she couldn't take the Carter empire anymore. The rules, the coldness, the way wealth turned people into strangers. After that, his father Daniel took control. Daniel wasn't cruel in the way people understood cruelty. He didn't shout much. He didn't strike often. His cruelty was colder. He measured Ethan's worth in grades, achievements, and appearances. "A Carter must always win," he said often. Ethan's birthday parties became less about him and more about the family's image. Gifts weren't chosen with love. They were statements. A car meant status. A school meant reputation. Ethan grew up in private schools where classmates envied his life, but none of them truly knew him. They saw the clothes, the money, the last name. They didn't see the loneliness. Even when he sat in the back seat of a chauffeured car, dressed in tailored suits, he felt small, like a guest in his own life. Now, at 21, Ethan stands between two worlds. Part of him wants to run away, to disappear from the Carter name and build a life that feels like his own. But another part fears the disappointment in his grandfather's eyes if he rejects the empire. Richard Carter built everything with fire and force. To walk away from it would feel like turning his back on family, even if that family has never truly given him love. The people around him only make the conflict sharper. His cousin Alex is the perfect Carter heir on the outside, confident, charming, ruthless. But Ethan has seen his games. Lies whispered into the right ears, deals cut with no care for the fallout. Alex thrives on control, and he looks at Ethan as competition, not family. His grandmother Margaret is different. She stays quiet at gatherings, almost invisible, but her eyes soften when they rest on Ethan. She has never spoken badly about Richard, her husband, but Ethan can feel the sadness in her. Sometimes in private, she tells him small truths. How the empire has broken hearts, how silence in this family is survival. She never tells him what to do, but her presence alone feels like a shield. And then there's Jordan. Jordan isn't from money at all. They met at a small bookstore downtown where Ethan liked to hide away from his world. Jordan treated him like a person, not a Carter. They could laugh about nothing, eat cheap takeout on the curb, and talk about dreams without worrying about legacy or inheritance. Jordan is the only one who reminds Ethan what life feels like when it's real. But the stakes are heavy. If Ethan dares to walk away from the family, he risks being disowned, cut off from everything he has ever known. He could lose his name, his inheritance, even the roof over his head. Yet if he stays, if he bends to the pressure and takes his place in the Carter empire, he risks losing himself. Already, he sometimes hears his father's voice in his own head, cold and sharp, and it frightens him. Every day feels like a tug of war. His grandfather expects loyalty. His father demands obedience. Alex schemes in the shadows. Margaret watches quietly. Jordan waits for Ethan to choose the life that feels true. And Ethan, caught in the middle, feels the walls of the Carter mansion closing in tighter and tighter, wondering if he will ever find the courage to break free. The dinner had gone on for hours, every course more extravagant than the last. Crystal glasses clinked, silver trays gleamed, and the smell of roasted meats and fine wine filled the air. The Carters never did anything small, but beneath the glitter and shine, the room was tense. Everyone was waiting for Richard Carter to speak again. Finally, Richard set down his glass. His voice was steady, carrying through the hall without effort. "I have an announcement," he said. The chatter stopped instantly. All eyes turned to him. Even the servants paused. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He already feared his grandfather's words, but he wasn't prepared for what came next. "Tonight," Richard continued, "I want to make my intentions clear. Daniel," he looked at his son with an unreadable expression, "you have done much for this family, but the future of this empire cannot rest in your hand." A ripple of shock went around the table. Daniel stiffened, his jaw clenching. Richard turned to Ethan. "The majority of the Carter fortune, the company, the legacy, it will go to Ethan." The words crashed like thunder. For a moment, the room was silent, stunned. Then it erupted. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "What nonsense is this?" His voice shook with rage. "He's a boy. He's not ready for any of this." Alex leaned forward, his face red. "This is ridiculous. You can't just skip over me, over everyone, and hand it all to him. He doesn't even care about the family business." Margaret gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. Her eyes darted to Ethan, full of worry. Ethan sat frozen, his mind spinning. He didn't want this. He never asked for it. His grandfather's words weren't a gift, they were a prison. He could feel every gaze on him, sharp and accusing. "I don't," he started, but his voice failed. The noise around him drowned out whatever he could have said. Daniel shouted over Richard. Alex argued furiously. Uncles and aunts whispered like vultures circling prey. Richard raised his hand, silencing them all. "This is not up for debate. Ethan is the only one I trust to carry this forward. The rest of you have shown me nothing but greed." Daniel's face twisted in fury. He glared at Ethan with such intensity that Ethan felt himself shrink under it. His father's pride, his control, his entire identity had just been shattered in front of everyone. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Toasts were forced, conversations broken. Ethan couldn't eat, couldn't breathe. The weight of his grandfather's decision pressed down on him like chains around his neck. By the time the dinner ended, he wanted nothing more than to run, but escape wasn't possible. Not in this house. Later, when most of the guests had left and the halls grew quiet, Daniel stormed into Ethan's room. His eyes were wild, his face pale with rage. "You planned this," Daniel hissed. "You turned him against me." "No, I didn't," Ethan began, but Daniel cut him off. "Don't lie to me." His voice cracked like a whip. "You've been playing the innocent son, but I see you. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? Waiting to take everything from me." Ethan shook his head, his chest tight. "I don't want it. I never asked for any of this." But Daniel didn't hear him, or didn't want to. His hand flew across Ethan's face, the slap sharp and cruel. The sound echoed in the room. Ethan stumbled back, clutching his cheek, the sting burning not just his skin but his heart. It wasn't the first time, and the pain was more than physical. Daniel leaned in close, his voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this. You've ruined everything." Then he turned and stormed out, leaving Ethan standing there, breathless and broken. Ethan touched his face, his eyes burning. The truth settled heavy in his chest. His grandfather's question, "Do you like the money?" had never been small talk. It was a test, a trap. And now Ethan understood the cruel answer. The money wasn't freedom. It was a chain. And whether the days after the birthday dinner felt like a storm with no end. What Richard had announced could not be taken back, and the Carter family moved quickly to fight it. Daniel and Alex, once cold rivals, suddenly stood side by side with one goal: tear Ethan down. Lawyers began showing up at the mansion, carrying thick files and cold eyes. They spoke in hushed tones with Daniel and Alex, planning ways to prove Ethan unfit to inherit. They questioned his schooling, his choices, even his friendships. Every small mistake from his past was dragged into the light. Missed classes, arguments with teachers, nights out with friends. They wanted to twist all of it into evidence that Ethan was reckless, spoiled, and weak. At first, Ethan tried to ignore it, but he couldn't. Papers were left on tables with his name bold across them. Conversations would stop the moment he entered a room. The house, already suffocating, became unbearable. One night, desperate for air, Ethan slipped into his grandfather's study. He had always been warned never to touch Richard's files, but curiosity burned stronger than fear. Pulling open the drawers, he found documents and letters that painted a picture he had never seen before. His father, Daniel, had been stealing from the company for years. Small amounts hidden in false accounts, money funneled through shell businesses. Alex, his cousin, had been worse. He had set up fraudulent deals, blackmailed local officials, and used the Carter name to get away with it. And through it all, Richard had known. The old man had quietly covered up scandal after scandal, protecting the Carter image even as the rot spread deeper. Ethan sat there in shock, holding the papers with trembling hands. This empire wasn't just cold, it was corrupt. His grandfather's control, the thing that had made him so feared and respected, had destroyed the family from. The only person he could turn to was his grandmother, Margaret. He found her one afternoon in the garden, tending to her roses. She looked fragile in her wide-brimmed hat, but her eyes still carried strength. "I found things," Ethan confessed, his voice low. "Things about Dad and Alex. About Grandpa, too." Margaret set down her shears and sighed. "I wondered when you would see it." "You knew?" She nodded slowly. "I've known for years. But speaking against Richard, it was never safe. His obsession with control has poisoned us all. Your mother left because she couldn't live under it. And I stayed, but silence became my prison." Her words cut deep. Ethan felt a strange mix of anger and sorrow. He wanted to scream, but he also wanted to cry. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked. "If I tell the truth, the family falls apart. If I stay quiet, I become part of the lie." Margaret touched his hand gently. "That choice, Ethan, is the burden of being a Carter. But maybe you're the first who can break the cycle." The pressure only grew heavier when the media caught wind of the fight. Newspapers and online outlets screamed headlines. Family war over billions. Grandson named heir sparks Carter feud. Paparazzi camped outside the mansion gates, snapping photos of Ethan every time he left. His face appeared on television screens, painted as the golden boy who had stolen the crown from his father and cousin. Ethan hated it. He hadn't asked for any of this, but the world had already chosen its story. People who had never met him debated his character, his future, his worth. He felt trapped in a role he couldn't escape. The pressure broke him one night when he met Jordan. They sat in their usual spot outside the bookstore, a bag of takeout between them. But instead of laughter, Ethan carried only anger. "You don't get it," he snapped when Jordan tried to calm him. "You don't know what it's like to have everyone watching you, waiting for you to fail." Jordan frowned. "I know you're hurting, Ethan, but this isn't you. You're letting them turn you into." "Into what?" Ethan cut in, his voice sharp. "Into a Carter? Maybe that's all I'll ever be." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Jordan's eyes darkened with hurt. Without another word, he stood and walked away, leaving Ethan alone with his food untouched. Ethan sat there, chest heaving, realizing what he had done. He had just pushed away the only friend who saw him as more than his family name. He was becoming exactly like the people he despised, cold, harsh, and blind to love. As he walked back to the mansion that night, the weight of it all settled on him. The family's lies, his father's cruelty, the media's glare, Jordan's silence. It pressed down until he could barely breathe. He had thought the chains of money were heavy before. Now they were suffocating. The Carter family gathered in the mansion's great hall for another meeting. Lawyers filled the seats, papers stacked high, tension thick in the air. Richard sat at the head of the table, looking more tired than Ethan had ever seen him. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his cane. Still, his voice carried its usual authority. "You all have forgotten what it means to be a Carter," he said. "This fighting, this greed, it will destroy us." Daniel leaned forward, anger sharp in his eyes. "You destroyed us the moment you chose him over me," he said, pointing at Ethan. "I built this company beside you, and you hand it to a boy who doesn't even want it?" Alex added quickly, "It's madness, Grandfather. The business needs strength, not hesitation." The room erupted in shouts, voices clashing like swords. Ethan sat silently, heart pounding, watching the family tear itself apart. Then, suddenly, Richard's voice cracked mid-sentence. He clutched his chest, gasped, and collapsed. "Grandfather." Ethan cried, leaping from his seat. Chaos broke out. Lawyers scrambled, Margaret screamed, Daniel froze in shock. An ambulance was called, and within minutes, Richard was rushed to the hospital. The next hours blurred. White walls, the smell of antiseptic, the steady beep of machines. Richard lay in a hospital bed unconscious, his face pale against the pillow. Ethan stood beside Margaret, holding her trembling hand. But outside that quiet room, Daniel and Alex were already moving. Ethan overheard them speaking with lawyers in the hallway. "We need to act now," Daniel whispered harshly. "If father dies, everything goes to Ethan. Rewrite the will before it's too late." Alex nodded. "We'll claim he wasn't of sound mind when he made the change. We'll put the company back where it belongs, with us." Ethan's stomach twisted. He slipped away, anger boiling inside him. Back at the mansion later that night, he returned to his grandfather's study, searching through the files again. What he found this time was worse than before. There it was in black and white, documents showing his father had embezzled millions from company accounts, funneled into secret holding. Letters proving Alex had been blackmailing political figures, using dirt to secure contracts. And tucked beneath them, memos signed by Richard himself, cover-ups, hush money, everything swept under the rug to keep the Carter name spotless. Ethan dropped into the chair, head in his hands. He could burn it all down with it. But at what cost? If he revealed the truth, the Carter legacy would shatter. His family name would be dragged through the mud. Margaret would suffer, and Richard, if he survived, would see the empire he built fall apart. But if he stayed silent, Daniel and Alex would win. They would keep their power, their corruption, their lies. And Ethan would be complicit. The choice weighed like lead. Protect the family name, or protect the truth. The decision came to him in the hospital, as he stood again beside his grandfather's bed. Richard's eyes fluttered open for a moment, cloudy but aware. Ethan swallowed hard, his hands shaking. "You asked me if I like the money," Ethan said softly, his voice breaking. "I don't. I like the truth." When the press gathered outside the hospital later, Ethan stepped forward, clutching the document. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but he didn't hesitate. He spoke clearly, his voice steady. "My father, Daniel Carter, has stolen from this company for years. My cousin, Alex, has committed fraud and blackmail under the Carter name, and my grandfather covered it up to protect the family image. But I won't. I won't carry on a legacy of lies." Gasps filled the air. Reporters rushed forward, microphones in his face, cameras capturing every word. Within hours, the story exploded across the world. Carter heir exposes family corruption. Billionaire dynasty in ruins. The fallout was swift. Daniel was arrested, the evidence undeniable. Alex tried to deny everything, but the proof left him disgraced and abandoned by his allies. The empire Richard had built shook at its foundation, but for the first time, Ethan felt a strange lightness in his chest. He had chosen truth over power. Inside the hospital, Margaret squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. Richard, weak but awake, stared at Ethan with something different, something softer than authority. Pride, perhaps. Or maybe respect. For Ethan, it didn't matter anymore. The chains were broken. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady hum of machines. Richard lay propped against his pillows, looking frail but awake. His sharpness was still there, but it was softened, dulled by the brush with death. When Ethan entered, Richard's eyes followed him, not with the weight of expectation this time, but with something gentler. "You made your choice," Richard said, his voice raspy. "You could have hidden the truth, but you didn't." Ethan nodded, unsure what to say. For years, every conversation with his grandfather had felt like a test. But now, standing at his bedside, Ethan felt no fear. Only clarity. "I don't want your fortune," Ethan said quietly. "I don't want the company or the empire. I want to build something of my own. I want a clean slate." Richard studied him for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled. It was faint, almost reluctant, but it was real. "For the first time, I see you. Not as an heir. Not as a Carter. As a man." Those words settled in Ethan's chest like a long-lost warmth. He had spent his whole life chasing approval that never came. Now finally, it wasn't about money or legacy. It was about respect. When Ethan left the hospital, the chaos outside was still loud. Reporters shouted questions. Flashing cameras chased him down the steps. But for once, he didn't feel trapped by it. He walked past them, head high, no longer chained by the Carter name. The first person he needed to see was Jordan. He found him at the bookstore, stocking shelves. For a moment, Ethan hesitated in the doorway, ashamed of the anger he had thrown at his friend. But Jordan looked up, eyes wary but open. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I let the worst parts of them get into me. I pushed you away when you were the only one who stood by me. I don't want to be that person anymore." Jordan studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You don't need to be perfect, Ethan. You just need to be real." And for the first time in weeks, Ethan laughed. It was small, shaky, but honest. Jordan smiled too, and just like that, the wall between them cracked. Back at the mansion, Margaret waited for him in her sitting room. She looked tired, but her eyes were kind. She handed him a small wooden box, worn smooth by time. "This belonged to your mother," she said softly. "She left it for you." Ethan opened it slowly. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in his mother's careful handwriting. He picked one up and unfolded it. "Ethan, I hope one day you will understand why I had to leave. I wanted you to grow up free, not bound by this house or its rules. My dream is that you will choose love over power, truth over pride." Tears blurred his vision. He read letter after letter, each one filled with her hopes for him. She had always believed he could be different, even when she couldn't stay to see it. Margaret touched his shoulder. "Your mother's spirit is in you. Don't let anyone take that away." Ethan closed the box and held it to his chest. In that moment, he knew wealth was not power. Integrity was. The courage to choose truth, to stand against corruption, to live with honesty. That was the real inheritance his mother had left him. As he walked out into the evening air, the mansion looming behind him, Ethan felt lighter. For years, the Carter name had been a cage. Now it was only a shadow. He had his own path. The night was quiet as Ethan stepped out of the Carter mansion. The heavy doors closed behind him, and for the first time, he didn't feel their weight pressing on his shoulders. He stood in the driveway, the same place where he had played as a boy, where expensive cars had lined up for endless parties. Now it all felt like a world he no longer belonged to. He turned back and looked at the house one last time. Not with anger, not with regret, but with clarity. It was a place of secrets, lies, and broken hearts, but it had also shaped him. And now he was finally free of it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. When he answered, Richard's voice came through, weak but steady. "Ethan," his grandfather said, pausing as if the words cost him effort. "You may not want the money, but you have something better. You have my respect." Ethan closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. For years, he had chased that acknowledgement, never sure if it would come. Now, when he had finally chosen to walk away, it arrived. "Thank you," Ethan whispered. He hung up, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and smiled through the tears. This time, he wasn't smiling for the cameras, for family approval, or for anyone else. He was smiling for himself. The cool night air wrapped around him as he walked down the path and stepped through the gates. Beyond them was the real world, not gilded or polished, but raw and alive. He wasn't carrying the Carter name anymore. He was carrying his own. For the first time in my life, he thought, I wasn't the Carter heir. I was just Ethan, and that was enough. Hey besties, thanks so much for watching till the end. Ethan chose truth over billions and walked away from the Carter curse, proving integrity is worth more than money. If you love this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and of course, subscribe for more gripping drama. See you in the next one. Her friends